So a big bit of news coming out of this week's edition of Impact Wrestling on Access TV was the surprising announcement of the departure of the Rascalz from Impact Wrestling. They will be finishing up with the company next week. Now, of course, the Rascalz are comprised of Trey, Mcgowan, Desmond, Xavier and Zachary Wentz. They are set to wrestle their final match for Impact Wrestling next week on Impact Wrestling on Access TV. Now, the announcement was made during this week's edition of Impact on Access TV, where it was revealed that the trio were being evicted from their famously created treehouse on the program, which therefore means that they have to leave Impact Wrestling. Now, it said during the storyline, during the segment, that the Rascalz hadn't paid their rent for the treehouse in about 2 years, and they'd received a letter notifying them that they must leave their hangout by next week. Now, at the end of the show, after helping their friend and Impact World Champion Rich Swann later on in the broadcast, Swann mentioned how he wanted to send the trio off with a bang. Therefore, a tag match was made between Des and Wentz taking on Trey, Mcgowan and Rich Swann next week. Now, obviously, initially, when this was first announced, a lot of people thought, okay, storyline. They're being evicted from the treehouse. This doesn't mean they're leaving the company or anything like that, but it is legitimate. Unfortunately, so it is legitimate. According to a report by PWInsider.com, the Rascalz' departure appears to be legitimate. It's a legitimate farewell, quote, barring any last-second change. Easy for me to say. So all three members of the Rascalz signed with the company in the fall of 2018. Trey Mcgowan was built as being a single star. He was getting a push. Obviously, at Slammiversary this year, he was in the main event competing for the Impact World Championship, whereas Des and Wentz were tag team competitors. But as I mentioned, according to PW Insider, the exit is legitimate, and they finished up their commitments with the company at the last set of TV tapings prior to the Turning Point event this coming weekend. So it was surprising, but according to multiple reports and look at all of the tributes that the trio have received online from their colleagues inside Impact Wrestling on social media, the departure was said to be amicable. There's no bad blood between the group and Impact Wrestling. The opportunity for them, of course, is to return at some point later on, but it would appear that we already know at this point the next step for the Rascalz in their career, because it looks like we already know the next destination for the Rascalz. It would appear that Desmond, Xavier, Zachary Wentz and Trey Mcgowan are indeed headed to WWE. That's according to Wrestling Inc. As previously mentioned, the trio are now currently 3 agents. They obviously were evicted from the treehouse, but Wrestling Inc. has reported that they have learned that the group has a standing offer from WWE, and while the trio hasn't officially signed a deal yet to go to the company, it's considered a formality, and all 3 men are expected to join the company in the near future. So, I mean, there's so much to break down there, really, isn't there? But when I first saw this, when I first heard this, initially, like everyone else, I was skeptical. I was like, well, it doesn't mean they're necessarily leaving. They've been evicted from the treehouse, whatever that means. Does that actually mean they're getting evicted from the company or anything like that? But again, it's legitimate. Once those reports came out, I was pretty shocked. I didn't see it coming. It hadn't been reported anywhere that all 3 guys' contracts were coming up. It hadn't been reported that they were looking to leave. It hadn't been reported about these links with WWE, and it's all sort of come out in the last couple of days. It's been very, very quick when it comes to this information. I think bottom line, when you look at it for Impact Wrestling, it's a massive loss. It really is a massive loss to them, for the company. And I know some people will say, well, they weren't, main event level players, or well, they weren't world champions or anything like that. I think it's a massive loss on several levels. I think it's a massive loss on the program. These are very, very popular competitors. You look at their following online on social media. They are young, modern pro wrestlers. The girls like them. The guys like them. They tick so many boxes. They're high-flying competitors, great workers. Some of the better talent, in my opinion, in ring in that company. I think Des and Wentz as a tag team, I think, are actually quite underrated. Some of the stuff they can do in the ring is actually extraordinary. I think Trey Mcgowan has a huge upside, and I even several times on the channel here said that I felt that he could actually be an Impact World Champion at some point, and I still do think he can be a World Champion somewhere. It just looks like it won't be in Impact Wrestling in the future. I also was really excited and hopeful, and I mentioned this in a video only about a week or so ago, that we were going to get a Rascalz versus the Motor City Machine Guns match. I really did feel that Desmond Wentz versus Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley would just be a massive, massive match, and a really exciting match, a real clash of generations. I really did feel that Desmond Wentz almost like, the current version of the Motor City Machine Guns in Impact Wrestling. Smaller guys, you would call them junior heavyweights if it was New Japan, sort of a cruiserweight tag team going up against an original cruiserweight style tag team. Even at one point, the Motor City Machine Guns were junior heavyweight tag team champions for New Japan during their initial TNA run. I felt like it would be a bit of a passing of the torch and a real great match, and you could almost have a trilogy or maybe even like a best of 5 series like they did previously with the Motor City Machine Guns and was it Generation Me or Beer Money? I think it was Beer Money back in the day. I felt like they could do something like that, and obviously that isn't the case now because they're leaving the company. And this is, for me, Impact losing top 3 stars. I do think so. As I mentioned earlier on in the video, Trey Mcgowan had a big push. He was in the main event of Slammiversary, and I did think after that, it's worth mentioning, I did think after that, Trey Mcgowan was involved in that main event, and then coming out of Slammiversary from sort of July to now in November, I was curious because I didn't feel like he was really doing that much, and I found that very, very odd. I thought, why is Trey Mcgowan not really factored in here? During the build-up to Slammiversary, he was all over. He was doing lots of promos, lots of vignettes, and he was obviously in the main event. He was featured in, and he didn't really do much afterwards, and I felt that was very odd. Now that we know why, he was on his way out the company. He was on his way out, and he wasn't going to sign a new deal along with the other members of the Rascalz, so now it does make sense. I think, as I mentioned, I felt that he could have been a top star in Impact, and I still do think he can be a top star wherever he goes. I think the Rascalz, the tag team of Desmond Wentz, I think they're a top tag team. They're a real top tag team. But this news that they could be going to WWE, to be honest, again, I can see both sides of this, and I don't mean to be a fence sitter on this one, but I can see both sides of this. But it does concern me. It does concern me. I am worried for them to go into WWE. And a lot of people would say, well, why are you worried? This is a massive opportunity for them. They can do great things. They can make a lot of money. They can work with top talent. And you are not wrong if you think that. You are not wrong if you think that. That's absolutely true. I just look at other names that are currently there in WWE or have been there in WWE. I look at these 3 guys, and the first name that comes to my mind is Ricochet. It's Ricochet. I think they are 3 wrestlers very much in the same vein of a Ricochet. High flyers, smaller guys, good-looking guys. There'll be hits with the ladies and the guys and all that kind of stuff. But I look at them and I can see a Ricochet. I can see a Ricochet in WWE, and by that I mean very, very talented, great in the ring. Does the WWE top brass understand them? Does the WWE top brass get them? I don't know. I also think of other names that from Impact specifically that have been in WWE. I think of EC3, and he came in, did okay in NXT, went to the main roster, and he just sat there for about 18 months, and he's trying to rebuild his career at this point. He's trying to rebuild his name. He was criminally misused. He had a bad feud with a Dean Ambrose that was halfway out the door. The crowd were cheering Ambrose because you would cheer the superstar over WWE any day. And EC3 got caught up in that, and he was punished for that, and he was told to sit on the sidelines for the remainder of his contract, and then got released back in April. I think of Eric Young. Eric Young, a similar story. Now he's in Impact. Previously, he was the Impact World Champion after returning to the company. But prior to that, he goes to WWE. He's in NXT. He's in Sanity. That does very, very well. Tag Team Champions in NXT. War Games. A different stable. A sort of chaotic stable. A fun gimmick. And then what happens? Goes to the main roster. Gets drafted to SmackDown. Does about nothing. The group gets split up and then goes to Raw and does even less. I mean, he did less than EC3. At least EC3 was, at least they tried to do a storyline between him and Dean Ambrose. Eric Young, they did nothing with. I mean, he was on main event, and I think he lost his matches all the time on main event. He had a jobber entrance on Raw and got defeated in about 5 seconds. And like Eric Young said to Vince McMahon, this is a 3-hour broadcast on Raw, and you can't fit someone in with the talent of Eric Young. And look at what Eric Young's done since he left the WWE back in April. Former Impact champion, arguably doing the best work of his career. He's reinvented himself, the world-class maniac. His angle with Rich Swann was the best thing over the summer for Impact Wrestling, and was the main event of Bound for Glory, their biggest show of the year. It became the main event of Bound for Glory because of the great work that Eric Young was doing over the summer. And this is a guy that couldn't even get on Monday Night Raw because Vince McMahon didn't see anything in him. You know, apart from maybe chasing the 24/7 championship around for 5 seconds. So I look at those names, and when I see that the Rascalz, when I see that Trey Mcgowan, Desmond, Xavier, Zachary, Wentz are going to end up in WWE, I worry. I do worry. I worry that the Rascalz will end up like those names I just said. And you look at Des and Wentz, they're obviously a tag team. Trey Mcgowan is a singles. But tag team wrestling, I mean, if you're a tag team, why on earth would you go to WWE at this point? Tag team wrestling in WWE in 2020, I mean, it has been for a long time, but especially in 2020, tag team wrestling is dead. It is dead. It is deader than dead. It is a fossil in the WWE right now. Tag team wrestling, it's less than being a priority. It's not even a priority. It's not even on the schedule of being a priority anytime soon. Tag team wrestling is dead. It is absolutely dead in WWE. And that goes the same for Raw, SmackDown, and NXT. It is not a priority. You only have at this point, like 5 tag teams across 3 brands. I still say that they should just unify that whole division, and at least maybe you can salvage it. But it isn't a priority. And it never has been a priority for WWE, but it certainly isn't now. If you're in a tag team, basically you're being split up in 6 months. That's how it works. And tag teams in WWE, they don't really exist. Legitimate tag teams don't exist anymore. They're 2 singles guys that are put together when creative goes, I don't think they can be a singles. We have nothing for them. We'll put them together. That's why Cesaro's career in WWE has been what it is. Because, he's just missing something. We'll put him in a tag team, whether that's with Nakamura, Sheamus, Tyson Kidd, Jack Swagger, whoever. That is Cesaro's career, and that is the epitome of WWE's opinion on tag team wrestling. So if I'm Des and Wentz, I'm looking at that going, is that really the place we want to go? You have the likes of FTR leaving the company because tag team wrestling doesn't matter in WWE. And Des and Wentz coming in ain't going to change that. It really ain't going to change that. So if I'm them, I'm wondering about that. I'm really wondering about that. But if I am the Rascalz and I'm heading to WWE, you have to wonder where are they going to go. Are they going to go to Raw? Are they going to go to SmackDown? Or are they going to go to NXT? I think most likely, this isn't an AJ Styles coming in or anything like that. This isn't a John Morrison returning to the company or anything of that nature. So I think the Rascalz, they go to NXT. They seem a natural fit to go to NXT, learn the WWE style, learn the WWE way of things, whether that's by scripted promos, the way they like to work, facing the hard camera, all of that kind of stuff, saying local medical facility and not a hospital because WWE is the land of madness when it comes to the mind of Vince McMahon. So I think they'll go into NXT and I think they'll cut their teeth there. And the question then would be, would they have success in NXT? Of course they will have success in NXT. Because a lot of the time, these outside hires from the independent scene or from Impact or wherever, from New Japan, when they come into WWE, when they go through NXT, they do very, very well. They do very well. Because Triple H understands the character. It's a bit more looser in NXT. They do actually acknowledge that there is a pro wrestling business outside of the WWE in NXT. So I'm sure that Trey Mcgowan, Des and Wentz, I think they'll do very well in NXT. I think they'll be over. The crowd will like them. As I said, they're high-flying guys. In NXT as well, they'll cater to your strengths and try and hide your weaknesses instead of exposing them like they insist on doing on Raw and SmackDown. So I think they'll do very well in NXT. I could see Des and Wentz being the tag team champions. Trey Mcgowan could absolutely be North American champion. Heck, who even knows he could be the NXT champion? I have no doubts about that. I really have no doubts about that. But eventually, they're going to have to go to Raw and SmackDown. And will they be successful on Raw and SmackDown? I don't know. I really don't know. I think that is the $500 million question. I don't know why I've done that figure, but that's what that is. I really don't know if they'd be a success on Raw and SmackDown because you have to look at the guys in charge. Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard, in their mind, they are booking pro wrestling in 1985 all over again. And I don't mean to slander them, but that is legitimately, look at the product. Look at the product and look at examples. I mentioned Ricochet. It's a great example of that. Look at recent call-ups from NXT. He's not even called Matt Riddle anymore. Riddle. Look at Keith Lee. These guys get called up. They get given silly gimmicks And any success that they've had in NXT doesn't count for anything on Raw and SmackDown. And that's not to say that it should, but it doesn't. It doesn't. I could easily see all three guys being called up to Raw or SmackDown, and suddenly they're like Ricochet. We're superheroes come to life. And they'll be wearing capes, or they'll be like Neville when he was called up to the main roster in WWE. And he had to wear a cape because he's a superhero, because he's a small guy, but he can fly, which means he's a superhero in the mind of Vince McMahon. And if anything, if they're a faction in WWE, they're more likely to be split up than to succeed. Look at this last draft. You had 1 million tag teams split up in the men's and women's division. If it's not Heavy Machinery or Lucha House Party or the Iconics or Banks and Bailey, that's what they do. They split people up. They split people up in tag teams because it's not a priority. Even the New Day got split up. Which, again, I don't necessarily think was a majorly bad idea. But this goes to show, if you're a faction, if you're a stable, if you're a tag team in WWE, it is a matter of time before you are split up. And I did think as well, when it comes to their run in Impact, I feel for the Rascalz, there is more for them to do. I do think there is more for them to do. As I mentioned, I feel that Trey Mcgowan can be a world champion in Impact Wrestling. I feel that Desmond and Wentz could be the tag team champions in Impact Wrestling. I feel like there is more tag teams for them to face. Whether it is the Good Brothers, whether it is the North, whether it is the Motor City Machine Guns, there is more for them to do there. And I would have liked to have seen them stay there maybe an extra year and then move on. I do think there was more there to do. And I think there is so much momentum in Impact Wrestling. I've been saying this for about 6 months now. But there's so much momentum in Impact and so much greatness that they're doing at the moment, and such a positivity backstage. Wait till they go to WWE, because that positive and high morale and everyone high-fiving each other that's going on in Impact Wrestling ain't going on backstage in WWE. I mean, in some cases, yes. I mean, first of all, why would you want to go to that performance center? That is just a pit of virus at the moment. I mean, outbreak after outbreak. Why would you want to go there? But then it comes to the morale. There are a lot of people that aren't happy in WWE. Heath, I would have, if I'm them, I'm speaking to Heath, because Heath is saying it in all of these interviews. He said, man, there are people that are messaging me and calling me saying, you know what, when my contract is up, can I get in on Impact Wrestling? Can I come into Impact? Because I don't want to be here anymore. The atmosphere here sucks. And I'm given giant scripted promos that I have to recite and look at the top of my head like this to try and remember them. Again, it's just, I worry for it. I worry for them. But as I mentioned, when you look at the Rascalz' recent bookings in Impact Wrestling, it does make sense that they're on their way out of the company because they've been doing jobs on TV for a while now. I mentioned after Slammiversary, Trey Mcgowan didn't do much. You look at Des and Wentz as a tag team, they've been putting over quite a few teams, whether it's Triple XL or anyone else. So it makes sense that that's been the case going forward. Even at Bound for Glory, didn't they lose to, was it the Dinas on the pre-show, the Rascalz? So it makes sense why they've been doing these jobs, because obviously they're trying to put over talent on the way out, which is the time-honoured tradition. It's what you do when you leave the territory. So they have to be credited for that. I think you have to look at also, when they're looking like they're going to go to WWE, business is business. And obviously they're probably going to be getting a better deal than they have in Impact right now. And money in a pandemic should not be sniffed at, and probably WWE knows this. But business is business, so I don't blame the Rascalz for going to WWE or NXT or anything like that, because for them, business, it's the right decision for them, and look, it's still WWE at the end of the day. It's the big leagues, it's where you want to go, it's where you aspire to go when you enter the professional wrestling industry, so you can't hold it against them. What you do have to worry about is, will Triple H get their gimmick in NXT? Because I think they'll go to NXT first. Let's start with that one. Will Triple H get their gimmick? I think he will. I think Triple H will get the Rascalz gimmick because he's a bit more, he's got his finger on the pulse a little bit more. Say what you will about Triple H, but with people like Matt Riddle, he absolutely got their gimmick. And other outside names that are coming, he's absolutely got what they're all about. Timothy Thatcher is another great example. He gets them. He understands the gimmick. Will Vince McMahon get their gimmick? Almost certainly not. And I know that's very absolute, and people will say, well, you don't know that for the case. But come on, he won't. You know, you look at the NXT call-ups recently, whether it is Matt Riddle, you know, suddenly all you can talk about is his feet. Oh, I've got frostbite on my tootsies, and that's why I wrestle barefoot, and I'm not called Matt Riddle anymore, I'm called Riddle. And Keith Lee, I'm going to have to change your gear, your entrance music, and everything about you, because I don't get your gimmick. Vince McMahon, if it's any gimmick Vince McMahon doesn't get, really, And that's the same, Matt Hardy was the same when he went back from Impact to WWE. This broken gimmick, I don't get it. If it doesn't get over, blame me. Vince McMahon, quite literally, we've spoken about the treehouse when it comes to the Rascalz here. Vince McMahon will quite literally put the Rascalz in a treehouse. I wouldn't be surprised. I really would not be surprised. We're going to put these guys in a treehouse. They're going to be three best friends, and they're going to stay in the treehouse all the time. And they're going to be superheroes. They're going to have Ricochet as their leader in the team in the treehouse. Honestly, don't be surprised. If that does happen, clip this, because I wouldn't be surprised. Vince McMahon will look at them and go, they can be three Mighty Mouse characters. Vince McMahon's dream is to get a Mighty Mouse gimmick to work in WWE. It's his favourite superhero. And he's tried it for the likes of Neville. There was rumours he was going to try it as well with Ricochet. And both times, people have had to say, look, that gimmick sucks. But this is the same guy that did Shorty G to Chad Gable. And legitimately, in that mind, he thought that would get Chad Gable over. So I don't think he does this out of spite. I don't think he would bury the Rascalz out of spite and go, oh, these are Impact guys, I'm going to bury them. I just think in reality, he thinks, oh, this is the best way to get them over. Because in Vince McMahon's head, it's 1985 still. And the whole smoke deal and all that kind of stuff, Vince won't and doesn't get that. He doesn't get that. He didn't get it when it came to Rob Van Dam, and he won't get it when it comes to Matt Riddle either. But maybe in their mind, maybe looking on the other side of things, the Rascalz might think, you know what, that's a long way away. We ain't going to Raw or SmackDown tomorrow. We're probably going to have success in NXT, and I do think they'll have success in NXT. I think with Triple H there, I think they'll have success. I think the crowd will like him. I think the talent there, I think it makes sense. Will they have success in WWE, though? That's another discussion. And I don't want to write them off already and say I can't see them having success in WWE, because I don't think that is fair. And I'm not a soothsayer. I can't read the future or anything like that. But I wouldn't be surprised either if all three guys are put on 205 Live. And is that the best use for them, to go on 205 Live? That show is, I spoke about tag team wrestling being dead. 205 Live is dead. It's a great show, has great talent on there, but it's been dead since its inception. And I think when it comes to Des and Wentz, and I spoke about them being a tag team and tag team wrestling in WWE being dead, there is no doubt when it comes to NXT. NXT needs tag teams. The tag team division in NXT is beyond bare. Who do you have at this point? You have Oney Lorcan and Danny Burch, Breezango. Is that it? Legado del Fantasma, and we'll touch on them. I guess part of them are a tag team. It's bare. It's very bare, and NXT needs tag teams. And historically, they've built good tag teams. AOP, FTR, American Alpha, Sanity. All of those great names have come through NXT, and they do need tag teams. And I think Des and Wentz would fit into there really well. And also NXT needs new talent. We saw it on last night's edition of NXT. They're pushing new talent because I think they realise, we need to make these new stars. We need to have this fresh, new version of NXT. We've just lost Keith Lee. We've lost Riddle. We're probably going to lose Adam Cole soon. Because, eventually they've got to go to the main roster, right? Again, would they want to? I don't know. But they've got to make new stars, and NXT does need new talent for that. But I could also see Trey Miguel facing Santos Escobar for the Cruiserweight Championship in NXT, which I think would be a good match. I think it'd be a great match. And I think the Cruiserweight division does need bodies. I think Santos Escobar, how many opponents has he got? He's going to face Isaiah Swerve Scott again for the millionth time? I don't think so. So Trey Miguel could be a great Cruiserweight champion, and maybe that's why they have brought him in. But I do think if Trey Miguel goes after the Cruiserweight Championship, again, I worry for him because WWE, maybe not in NXT, but certainly on the main roster, they look at that and say, right, that's your ceiling, that's you done. And if you're labelled with that Cruiserweight bug, then you might be in trouble. Now, I know people will say, well, what about Buddy Murphy and what about Mustafa Ali? They've been Cruiserweight champions. That is true. But you look at people like Drew Gulak, he's 24/7 stuff on Raw. And who's to say that Trey Miguel won't be doing that in a couple of months' time? Now, as I mentioned, WWE, for anyone, or most people at least, when they enter the pro wrestling business, WWE is the pinnacle. It's still the most watched show. SmackDown is still the most watched show every single week. And superstars and pro wrestlers, rather, they come into the business and they dream about having that WrestleMania match, that WrestleMania moment. I think everyone, when they get into wrestling, wants to have that WrestleMania match. So you can't blame them. You look at people like Kevin Owens. He said, look, I'm never leaving WWE. Why? Because this is all I've ever wanted. My dream of getting into wrestling was to be with the WWE. That's what I grew up watching. My dream was to wrestle at WrestleMania, and I will always stay with this company, regardless of how bad they're treating me, or if I don't think I'm getting pushed the right way, I will stay with WWE. And with these kind of situations, as I mentioned in the pandemic, the money is there, but you got to remember, people grew up watching WWE, and it is still the pinnacle. Regardless of the bad things you see on TV and the bad things you read about online about people being mistreated, like I said, Ricochet, Eric Young, EC3, and more, Jon Moxley and other, you have to realize that it still is the pinnacle, and it's still what people dream of when they enter this industry, and you can't rule that out. So when WWE is interested in you, like these three guys, they must look at it and go, look, you sometimes you just can't turn it down. You just can't turn it down, so you can't blame them. You really can't blame them. But if I could talk to them and I could pick their brains, I would ask what they hope to achieve, and if they're weary of some of the things that they have heard, because they must have spoken to people in Impact. They must have spoken to a Heath, to an Eric Young, etc. They must have, because you would. Just to say, like, what's the situation there? Heath's a guy that was with the WWE for like 10 years. He knows the current environment there. I'd be picking his brains going, what do you think? So they must know. So I would say to him, just be very, very careful, because the patterns are there to see. The patterns are there to see. You come in to NXT, you do great, you have great matches, great segments, you have a unique gimmick, you get over, and then suddenly it's all this excitement. Oh, I can't wait for them to come up to the main roster. I can't wait for them to go to Raw or SmackDown. How many times have we seen it? I can't wait for Keith Lee to come to Raw. I can't wait for Matt Riddle to come to SmackDown. I can't wait for Shinsuke Nakamura to come to SmackDown. I can't wait for Bobby Roode to come to SmackDown. All of these guys, and then they come up, and then suddenly you come to Raw or SmackDown, you get given a different gimmick that's maybe stuck in the 1980s. They strip everything from you that made you popular in the first place. Whether it's your entrance with Shinsuke Nakamura, whether it's turning you into a babyface when you're a heel if you're Bobby Roode, whether it's Keith Lee changing your entrance music and your ring attire, whether it's Matt Riddle of quite literally taking your first name and making you say bro way more than you ever used to in NXT. The patterns are there. The patterns are there. And then suddenly you're on Raw or SmackDown, you get overly scripted promos, you get dumb verbiage. And then, if anything, like a Keith Lee, remember Keith Lee, he was a double champion earlier this year. He was the first ever guy to be the NXT and North American champion at the same time. And it's almost to the point now in WWE that if you're really over from NXT, to the point where they're saying, oh, I can't wait for them to get to Raw or SmackDown because they'll change the show, they'll be so good. If you're really over from NXT, it's almost held against you at this point by Vince McMahon. It's like coming in from WCW and being over in the Attitude Era. Well, we got to take them down a peg. Let's break them down and build them back up in my image, pal. So that would be what I'm worried about for them. And look, quite frankly, all three are smaller guys. They are cruiserweights, or junior heavyweights, whatever you want to call them. They're smaller guys, they have a cool look, and they can fly around in the ring. Ask Ricochet how that's worked out for him in WWE. Although, I would argue that I think the Rascals, all three guys, I think they're better talkers than Ricochet. I think a massive problem for Ricochet is his promo ability just isn't there. And I do think the Rascals are better on the mic than him, but ask him how that's worked out. Because dumb creative is dumb creative, and once that's saddled with you, you can be in massive trouble. So as I mentioned, it's a huge loss for Impact. I wish them the best going to WWE. I know I've said this a little bit of a tirade, and you might think, wow, he doesn't want them to do well in WWE. Of course I want them to do well in WWE. But it was surprising news. They are going to be missed absolutely by Impact Wrestling. They're three excellent workers, well-liked backstage. But Impact will move on, and it'll be interesting to see what happens next. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the Rascals leaving Impact Wrestling and likely being headed to WWE in the near future? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll be sure to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoyed chatting with you guys about Impact Wrestling, so be sure to leave a comment below. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button. Really does help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings, and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.